Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. Mallory Quinn, a young woman of 19 with a history of addiction, found herself volunteering for a research study at the University of Pennsylvania, desperate for cash. Arriving at a crowded auditorium filled with women, she felt out of place and unwell, her body aching with chills. To cope with the discomfort of withdrawal, Mallory discreetly consumed a portion of an OxyContin pill she'd brought with her, seeking a temporary reprieve from the shaking. Eventually, a doctor called her name, and Mallory, dragging her heavy parka, followed her through a maze of hallways to a small, windowless room. Inside, 5 young men in fresh navy blue scrubs sat in folding chairs, heads bowed. The doctor, whose name Mallory vaguely recalled as Susan, explained the experiment. Mallory would stand facing the men, blindfolded, and raise her hand when she felt the male gaze upon her. It was to be repeated several times. Despite her initial flippant remark comparing it to a scene from 50 Shades of Grey, the atmosphere in the room was serious and clinical. Blindfolded, Mallory stood in silence, acutely aware of the unseen men. A strange, fluttery feeling, almost like a sixth sense, washed over her, and she raised her hand. It happened again and again, each time a distinct sensation, sometimes accompanied by a high-pitched buzzing like a mosquito near her ear. When the blindfold was removed, the young men erupted in applause. Mallory, it turned out, was the first participant to achieve near-perfect accuracy in detecting the gaze. In the doctor's office, probing questions followed. How did Mallory know? She couldn't articulate it, but she knew. It was a feeling, a spidey sense, and sometimes a sound. Intrigued, the doctor, Susan, eagerly typed notes on her laptop, inviting Mallory back for further tests. Mallory, however, traded her iPhone for drugs that very night, severing contact and any chance of further participation. Now clean for 18 months, Mallory Quinn, 21 years old, lived at Safe Harbor, a 3/4 house in northeast Philadelphia. Regret was a constant companion, but sobriety was a fragile shield against the cravings. Her sponsor, Russell, a former Olympic coach turned minister, encouraged her running, framing it as running to recovery, and pushed her to plan for a new life, far from old temptations. He had arranged a nanny interview for her with the Maxwells in Springbrook, New Jersey. Russell, ever the athletic mentor in his Adidas tracksuit, drove Mallory to the interview, a nerve-wracking car ride for someone used to buses and subways. He offered 2 pieces of advice. Call Teddy, the child, gifted, and in case things went south, a small drug test dip card, a trump card. Mallory reluctantly took it, shoving it deep in her bag. Russell dropped her off at the Maxwells' Victorian house and drove away, leaving Mallory to face her future. The Maxwell residence was a vision of suburban perfection, a large yellow Victorian with a wraparound porch and meticulously manicured grounds. Hesitantly, Mallory approached, ringing the doorbell. The door was opened by a small boy with bright orange-reddish hair sticking straight up like a troll doll. It was Teddy. Shyly, he vanished up the stairs, leaving Mallory alone. She stepped into the foyer, struck by the cool, clean air and the scent of Murphy oil soap. The house was pristine, modern furniture, gleaming hardwood floors. Caroline Maxwell, tall, thin, blonde, with a delicate, ethereal beauty, appeared, her walk graceful and soundless. She greeted Mallory warmly, a hug rather than a handshake, radiating compassion and understanding. Caroline expressed admiration for Mallory's sobriety, praising her strength. The kitchen was enormous, a chef's dream, filled with natural light and state-of-the-art appliances. Caroline offered refreshments, a seltzer, and led Mallory to a breakfast nook. She presented a typed list of house rules: no drugs, no drinking, no smoking, no profanity, no screens, no red meat, no junk food, no unauthorized visitors, no social media photos of Teddy, and no religion, only science. Rule 11, handwritten, simply stated, have fun. Caroline apologized for the rules, especially the science-only aspect, self-consciously noting Mallory's small gold cross necklace. Mallory assured her the rules were no problem. They moved to the den, a cozy family room lined with bookshelves and opera posters. Teddy was on the floor, drawing intently. He remained shy at first, but Caroline pulled out a thick stack of Teddy's drawings. As Mallory admired them, horses, trees, smiley faces, Teddy relaxed, leaning against her, his small body warm and comforting. Caroline pointed out one drawing, almost hidden in the stack, a strange picture of Teddy and his special friend. Anya, Teddy corrected. Caroline explained Anya was an imaginary friend, someone for Teddy to play with while they worked. Teddy said Anya slept under his bed, singing to him at night. The front door chimed, and Ted Maxwell arrived. Older than Caroline, tall, trim, gray-haired, with a designer casual style, he greeted his wife and son. Ted, however, was less welcoming. He was formal, asking for a resume which Mallory didn't have in paper form. He meticulously reviewed her resume, marking it up with annotations and X's, questioning her lack of foreign languages, musical skills, and international travel experience. He seemed skeptical, focused on the state subsidy for her daycare job, calculating figures in the margins of her resume. He moved Mallory's resume to the bottom of the stack. The interview, at least with Ted, felt like a failure. Caroline, sensing Ted's negativity, quickly ushered Mallory outside to show her the guest cottage. "Don't mind Ted," she whispered, confiding that he was worried about Mallory's history and preferred a whiz-kid nanny. But Caroline was determined to give Mallory a chance. The backyard was an oasis, with a lush green lawn, a sparkling pool, and beyond, a dense forest. Caroline explained a path led to Hayden's Glen, a nature preserve. Hidden among the trees was the guest cottage, a miniature Swiss chalet. Inside, it was small but pristine, a single room with white walls, exposed rafters, a kitchenette, a comfortable bed, and a tiny bathroom. Caroline emphasized the privacy in the brand new bed. Ted followed them into the cottage, his demeanor still cool. He stressed the single occupancy rule, no overnight guests. He then told a story of a baby bird they tried to save named Robert who died, emphasizing the need for caution and questioning if Mallory was too much of a gamble. Mallory, sensing the interview was failing, pulled out the drug test dip card, offering weekly testing to ease Ted's concerns. Ted recoiled, disgusted, stating he wanted a nanny who didn't need to pee in a cup every week. Back in the foyer, Caroline and Ted argued in hushed tones in the kitchen, Caroline pleading, Ted's voice sharp and dismissive. Finally, they returned, Caroline forcing a smile, saying they'd be in touch. Ted practically shoved Mallory out the door. Just as they were about to close it, Teddy squeezed between them, handing Mallory a drawing, a present. It was stick figures, simple but touching. Tears welled in Mallory's eyes as she hugged Teddy, a rare moment of physical contact. Perhaps his father didn't believe in her, but this little boy seemed to see something good in her. Walking to the train station, Mallory strolled through the idyllic streets of Springbrook, imagining a life there, a life she might never have. At Starbucks, she ordered a lemonade and recognized Russell, reading the sports pages. "It was horrible," she told him. "Your trump card was a disaster." Russell laughed, revealing Caroline had already called him. She wanted Mallory to start immediately, afraid another family would steal her. Packing was quick. A suitcase Russell provided replaced a plastic bag. A small, bittersweet farewell party at Safe Harbor, and just 3 nights after the interview, Mallory was on a train back to Springbrook, ready for her new life. Ted and Teddy met her at the station, Teddy bearing a bouquet of yellow daisies, a peace offering perhaps. The drive to the Maxwells' house was a cheerful neighborhood tour, the strained atmosphere of the interview completely gone. Ted was jovial, insisting she call him Ted, no longer Mr. Maxwell. Caroline, welcoming her to the cottage, confirmed Ted's change of heart, crediting Teddy's instant connection with Mallory. Dinner on the patio was idyllic, grilled kebabs, homebrewed iced tea, and Teddy's boundless delight. Ted and Caroline shared their meet-cute story, a charming tale of books and Barnes & Noble at Lincoln Center. Even their mild disagreements, like Teddy's insistence on bathroom privacy, were laced with humor and affection. Caroline mentioned a past incident of Teddy exposing himself, a moment of parental embarrassment, and a lesson in private parts and consent. The evening painted a picture of a loving, if slightly rule-bound family. The next day, Caroline took Mallory swimsuit shopping and then, unexpectedly, gifted her a pile of designer clothes from her own wardrobe. She also pressed a small pink flashlight stun gun into Mallory's hand, a Vipertech Mini, citing a recent carjacking as reason enough for suburban self-defense. Mallory, despite the seemingly peaceful surroundings, clipped it to her keychain. Mallory quickly settled into a routine. Her days began early, serenaded by birdsong, with tea and oatmeal on the cottage porch, observing the wildlife that ventured to the edge of the yard. Breakfast with Caroline and Teddy in the main house followed, always waffles for Teddy, then kitchen cleanup for Mallory before Caroline left for work. Mornings were structured around outings, library story time, grocery shopping adventures. Teddy was a delight, endlessly curious, showering Mallory with questions. Lunch was simple, followed by Teddy's quiet time, Mallory's hour of respite. Afternoons were for games, then sunscreen and pool time. Evenings meant Caroline's return, family dinner preparations, Mallory's run, and then quiet evenings in the cottage, reading or indulging in Hallmark Channel movies, seeking refuge in their predictable, wholesome narratives. Life was peaceful, perhaps even bordering on boring, but for Mallory it was a triumph. A steady paycheck, savings, a sense of purpose in caring for Teddy, and the Maxwells' unwavering trust, especially Ted's, validated her recovery. Ted, though absent during the day, often sought Mallory's opinions in the evenings, engaging her in conversations about consumer brands, business strategies, making her feel valued and heard. The only shadow in this idyllic summer was Anya, Teddy's imaginary friend. Anya's pronouncements often contradicted Mallory's instructions, causing minor power struggles. Caroline advised patience, believing Anya would fade. Ted, however, urged a firmer stance, dismissing Anya as unreal. Mallory opted for a middle ground, baking cookies and gently probing Teddy about Anya, her origins, her likes and dislikes. Teddy, surprisingly, admitted, "I know she's not real," a whispered confession that saddened Mallory, feeling like she'd shattered a childhood fantasy. She shared a story of her own childhood imaginary friend, Cassiopeia, emphasizing that imaginary friends were acceptable as long as they weren't used to break rules, a lesson Teddy seemed to absorb. Later, left alone, Teddy retreated to the bathroom, leaving his latest drawing behind, face down on the table. Family movie night was a Maxwell tradition, always something with genuine artistic merit, never cartoons or blockbusters. Teddy's favorite was The Wizard of Oz, inspiring pool games of Land of Oz with Mallory playing all the roles, a theatrical, splashy performance. One afternoon, during a melting witch scene, a landscaper, Adrian, appeared by the pool fence, introducing himself to Teddy in Spanish. Teddy, proud of his Barcelona-acquired Spanish, greeted him enthusiastically. Adrian, wiry, tanned, and surprisingly handsome, was there with Lawn King. They chatted, Adrian flirting gently before his boss El Jefe summoned him away, scolding him in rapid Spanish. Teddy, captivated by Adrian and his high-speed mower antics, ran inside to fetch a drawing for him. As Adrian accepted the stick figure portrait, Mitzi, the Maxwell's neighbor, appeared, a short, jewelry-laden woman with a strange, skunky odor. She warned Mallory about the landscapers, advising discretion around Mexicans, a racist comment delivered with unsettling earnestness. She spoke of the cottage's dark history, calling it the Devil House, whispering tales of Annie Barrett, a murdered artist. Caroline dismissed Mitzi as cuckoo, paranoid, and likely high, warning Mallory to limit contact. Caroline dismissed the murder story as neighborhood gossip, assuring Mallory the previous owners had lived there for 40 years without incident, conveniently overlooking that they used the cottage as a tool shed, not a residence. Later that night, unsettled by Mitzi's stories, Mallory went for a run, pushing herself to exhaustion. Back at the cottage, she found sleep elusive, plagued by a high-pitched buzzing sound, a moth smacking against the window, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The thought of Annie Barrett and the research experiment from months ago resurfaced, a disquieting echo in the quiet night. Weekends were quiet for Mallory, spent cleaning, running, or attending sparsely populated NA meetings. She found solace in her workdays with Teddy. A typical Monday began with Teddy under the kitchen table, playing with farm animals. Caroline, rushing to work, mentioned Teddy's bedwetting, a recurring issue she attributed to the move. Mornings often involved forest explorations, enchanted forest adventures on trails they named themselves: Yellow Brick Road, Dragon's Pass, Royal River, Giant Beanstalk. Teddy, full of imaginative stories, narrated their hikes. One morning, overhearing Teddy talking in his room during quiet time, Mallory paused, curious. It sounded like a one-sided conversation, fragments of phrases about clouds, stars, apologies. Later, the school principal called, welcoming the Maxwells. That afternoon, Teddy presented a new drawing, a man dragging a lifeless woman through the forest, crescent moon and stars above. When Mallory questioned it, Teddy shrugged, calling it a game, Anya acting out stories for him to draw. He dismissed Pictionary with childish scorn, insisting Anya couldn't play board games. He giggled, seemingly unbothered by the macabre content of his art. That night, Mallory bought a tablet researching Annie Barrett online, finding nothing. Moths battered her window screen and the drawing of Anya haunted her. Russell called, concerned about her hamstring, but his real concern was Mallory's well-being. He sensed something was amiss, asking about memory glitches and forgetfulness. He urged her to push harder in her training, sending swimming exercises, but his worry lingered. That night, alone in the cottage, the high-frequency humming returned, the feeling of being watched intensifying. Following Russell's advice, Mallory ventured to the pool late one night for swimming exercises. The forest seemed closer, the crickets louder. A crack from the woods startled her, then soft footsteps near her cottage. Ted appeared, joining her for a swim. He offered swimming tips and noticed her flyers tattoo, joking about it. Another crack from the forest interrupted them. Mallory voiced her unease about someone in the woods. Ted dismissed it as teenagers or rabbits, attributing her fears to Mitzi's stories. He cautioned her about Mitzi, calling her untrustworthy, possibly dealing drugs. Caroline appeared, sharp and upset, demanding to know why Mallory hadn't delivered the principal's message. She scolded Mallory sharply, a rare outburst. Ted, trying to smooth things over, minimized Caroline's anger. Back in the cottage, the footsteps returned right outside her window, then beneath the floorboards. Terrified, Mallory investigated, finding an access panel under the rug. Opening it, she was confronted by something rearing up, claws and teeth bared. She screamed, slamming the panel shut. Caroline and Ted rushed to her cottage. Ted, armed with a pitcher of water, discovered a possum, not a rat, under the cottage. Caroline, shaken, insisted Ted nail the hatch shut. Later, they shared chamomile tea in the cottage, a fragile peace restored. Weekends remained quiet. One Saturday, while most were enjoying weekend activities, Mallory bleached her bathroom grout. Sunday church visits proved isolating. She resisted social media, focusing on running and cooking. Weekends were a stark contrast to the fulfilling workdays. Monday, Teddy was a cow, mooing under the table. Caroline, again rushed, mentioned Teddy's bedwetting, a frequent occurrence. In the enchanted forest, Teddy remained withdrawn. Back home, during quiet time, Mallory overheard another one-sided conversation from Teddy's room, punctuated by pauses. The school principal called again. Teddy presented another drawing, a man walking backward through a forest, dragging a woman by the ankles, a crescent moon and stars above. Teddy called it a game, Anya acting out stories. He insisted it wasn't for his parents. Anya wanted Mallory to have it. Troubled, Mallory bought a tablet, searching for Annie Barrett again, still finding nothing. Moths and the tapping branch outside her window unnerved her. Russell called again, his tone sharper, probing for glitches, memory lapses. He sensed something was wrong. He urged her to push harder with swimming and reminded her of his proximity, offering support. Later that night, venturing out to the pool for swimming exercises, the forest seemed menacing, closing in. A loud crack from the woods sent shivers down her spine. Ted emerged, joining her swim. He offered tips, but the unease persisted. He noticed her gritty tattoo, and Mallory, embarrassed, claimed she'd get it lasered off. Another crack from the forest. Ted dismissed her fears, attributing them to Mitzi's stories. Caroline appeared, upset about the unreturned principal's call. Mallory, flustered, admitted she'd been distracted by a drawing Teddy gave her. Caroline, annoyed, retreated to the house. Ted, trying to console Mallory, insisted Caroline would cool off. Later, alone in the cottage, the footsteps returned, closer now, circling the cottage, then burrowing beneath it. Terrified, Mallory investigated, finding the access panel. Opening it, she screamed at the sight of something rearing up from the darkness. Ted and Caroline rushed to her cottage. Ted, with water, chased away a possum. Caroline, shaken, had Ted nail the hatch shut. Despite the fright, the shared tea and laughter afterwards eased the tension. A brief moment of family-like comfort. The next day, Mallory ran, passing Adrian's house, the flower castle, and briefly saw him in a suit before his parents whisked him away. Later, neighbor Mitzi warned her about the landscapers again and the Devil House history, mentioning Annie Barrett's murder in the cottage. Caroline dismissed Mitzi's tales as paranoia, but Mallory remained intrigued. That night, she researched Annie Barrett online, finding nothing. Disturbing sounds outside the cottage, and the persistent humming sensation kept her awake. Weekends were lonely. One Monday, Teddy's bedwetting incident led Mallory to the laundry room where she overheard Teddy talking to Anya again. He spoke of clouds, stars, apologies, then laughter. Later, he presented a disturbing drawing. A man burying Anya in a forest, stars twinkling above. Teddy claimed Anya directed his drawings, illustrating her story. Teddy's drawings became increasingly disturbing. During a Land of Oz pool game, Adrian, the landscaper, reappeared, and Mallory lied, claiming to be a Penn State athlete. Mitzi interrupted, warning Mallory about the Mexicans. Mitzi's unsettling stories about the Devil House and Annie Barrett intensified Mallory's unease. Caroline dismissed Mitzi as crazy and paranoid, but Mallory couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, restless, Mallory ran and then tried to relax with a Hallmark movie but was too unsettled. The humming returned, the feeling of being watched intensified. The next day, Teddy drew a picture of a man strangling Anya. Alarmed, Mallory finally showed Caroline the increasingly disturbing drawings. Caroline dismissed them as fairy tale influences and normal childhood imagination. Ted also minimized the drawings, but Caroline, worried, proposed moving Mallory into the main house. Mallory declined, wanting her own space. That night, during a swim, Mallory felt watched again. Ted joined her, offering swimming tips and revealing Caroline's desire to remove a tattoo. Another crack from the forest startled them. Ted dismissed Mallory's fears again. Caroline approached, agitated about the unreturned school call. Mallory, flustered, admitted distraction by Teddy's drawing. Caroline scolded her sharply for the missed message. Ted, trying to calm things, dismissed Caroline's anger. Later, alone in the cottage, the footsteps returned, circling, then burrowing under the floorboards. Terrified, Mallory investigated, finding the access panel. Opening it, she saw something monstrous in the darkness. She screamed. Ted and Caroline rushed to her aid, Ted dispatching a possum. Caroline, still worried, had Ted nail the hatch shut. The incident, while resolved, amplified Mallory's growing fear. Weekends remained lonely. One Monday, Teddy was playing cows. Caroline mentioned Teddy's bedwetting. In the enchanted forest, Teddy remained withdrawn. Back home, during quiet time, Mallory again overheard Teddy's one-sided conversations with Anya, interspersed with giggles. He drew a picture of a man burying Anya in a forest, stars twinkling above. Teddy called it a game, Anya acting out stories, and insisted Anya wanted Mallory to have the disturbing drawing. Convinced something was wrong, Mallory decided to investigate Annie Barrett's story further. Driven by unease, Mallory visited Mitzi, sharing Teddy's disturbing drawings. Mitzi, after a cryptic warning about provocation near the pool, revealed the local legend of Annie Barrett, a painter murdered in Mallory's cottage after World War II. Mitzi's story amplified Mallory's fears. Back home, Caroline dismissed the story as paranoia, but Mallory remained disturbed. That night, insomnia and paranoia gripped Mallory in the cottage. The humming, the feeling of being watched, and the unsettling drawings fueled her anxiety. The next day, Teddy drew another disturbing picture, the man shoveling dirt over Anya's body. Teddy claimed Anya dictated the drawing. Alarmed, Mallory felt compelled to act. That night, during family movie night, Wizard of Oz again, Mallory's unease peaked. She decided to investigate Mitzi's story further. Visiting Mitzi's house with ginger snap cookies as a pretext, she found Mitzi's kitchen cluttered with gun cleaning supplies and a Ouija board. Mitzi, confirming the Annie Barrett story, spoke of the cottage's dark history. Concerned about Teddy's drawings, Mallory theorized Anya's spirit was communicating through Teddy. Mitzi, agreeing children were receptive to spirits, proposed a seance in Mallory's cottage with Teddy present to contact Anya directly. Mallory hesitated, fearing the Maxwells' reaction. Mitzi downplayed their rules. In Mitzi's dusty bathroom, Mallory snooped in the medicine cabinet, battling a sudden drug craving, finding a bottle of oxycodone, thankfully empty. Returning to the kitchen, Mitzi revealed a large antique Ouija board. They planned a seance in Mallory's cottage for the next day, involving Teddy. Mitzi believed Anya, attached to Teddy, was trying to communicate. The seance was tense. Mitzi attempted to contact Anya directly. The planchette moved erratically, spelling gibberish. Mitzi accused Mallory of pushing it. Teddy, drawn by the commotion, appeared at the door, curious. Mitzi, showing him the Ouija board, declared it a tool to speak with the dead. Horrified, Mallory quickly dismissed it as a game, urging Teddy away. Caroline, arriving home, confronted Mallory about the drawings, Ted joining them. Dismissing Mallory's ghost theory, they attributed the drawings to fairy tale influence and Teddy's imagination. Caroline, however, was clearly disturbed. Later, Ted, during a late-night swim, again dismissed Mallory's fears, but Caroline remained unconvinced. Back in the cottage, alone, Mallory felt increasingly isolated and afraid, the humming and the sense of being watched intensifying. Packing to leave, Mallory had a change of heart and stayed. Monday, she found Teddy playing quietly. Caroline mentioned Teddy's bedwetting. In the forest, Teddy remained withdrawn. Back home during quiet time, Mallory overheard another one-sided conversation. Teddy presented another disturbing drawing of a man burying Anya. He insisted Anya wanted Mallory to have it. That night, Mallory, fueled by Mitzi's story and Teddy's drawings, researched Annie Barrett at the bookstore, meeting Adrian again. Sharing her fears in the drawings, Adrian, surprisingly receptive, suggested Annie might be trying to communicate. He proposed researching Annie Barrett at the library. Packing for a weekend alone, Mallory received a call from Russell, who was alerted by Caroline about Mallory's ghost theories. Russell urged meetings and support, sensing Mallory's relapse risk. Later, Ted invited Mallory for a late-night swim. Afterward, Ted, noticing her Flyers tattoo, made an awkward pass, then dismissed her fears as Mitzi's influence. Caroline appeared, confronting Mallory about the missed school call. Later, alone again, the footsteps returned, closer, then under the cottage. Terrified, Mallory discovered the access panel, opening it to confront a creature underneath. She screamed and the Maxwells rushed to her aid. Ted chased away a possum, but the fear lingered. Caroline, still concerned by Mallory's state, offered her a room in the main house. The next day, Mallory ran and then visited Adrian at his house, showing him Teddy's drawings and Mitzi's Annie Barrett story. Adrian, intrigued, promised to ask his librarian mother for help. That night, back in her cottage, Mallory found new drawings on her porch, darker, more detailed. She felt increasingly watched, the humming intensifying. She called Russell, who, concerned, offered to cut short his vacation and return. 3 nights later, more drawings appeared, pinned to her refrigerator, even more disturbing. Driven to understand, Mallory revisited Mitzi, who suggested a seance bypassing Teddy. During the seance, Mallory felt a presence, the planchette moving erratically, spelling gibberish. Mitzi, frustrated, accused Mallory of pushing it and ended the session abruptly. Teddy appeared, drawn by the commotion, and Mitzi shockingly described the Ouija board as a way to speak with the dead. Despite Mallory's protests to Teddy, it was just a game. Caroline, returning home, confronted Mallory about the drawings. Ted dismissed them as fairy tale influence, but Mallory, desperate, revealed her ghost theory, showing the Maxwells the drawings. Caroline dismissed it as cognitive dissonance, a fantasy. Ted moved Mallory's resume to the bottom of the stack again. That night, after running, Mallory found herself confronted by Ted in the cottage, shirtless in her bed. He claimed he sought refuge from a fight with Caroline, but his behavior was unsettling. He spoke of running away together to Whidbey Island. Caroline interrupted and Ted abruptly left. Later, Caroline, still angry, confronted Mallory about the drawings and her delusions. The next morning, Caroline was still cold. Teddy, now with an iPad, ignored Mallory. Another disturbing drawing appeared. Mallory, desperate, decided to plant a baby monitor in Teddy's room. During quiet time, she watched him draw, his body convulsing, his eyes rolling back. She confronted him and he denied drawing. Later, she showed the drawings to Mitzi, who suggested contacting Anya directly via Ouija board. That night, after swimming with Ted, Caroline confronted Mallory about the school call. Feeling cornered, Mallory impulsively offered a drug test, which Ted accepted with a smirk. Waiting for Caroline and Ted to resolve their argument, Mallory felt increasingly isolated and unsafe. Mallory, armed with a hidden baby monitor, watched Teddy during quiet time. The video feed glitched and a whispered hello echoed through the speaker. The video became distorted, Teddy's image grotesque. Then convulsions on screen, Teddy's bed thumping against the ceiling. Mallory rushed upstairs, finding Teddy's door locked, smelling a strong ammonia scent. Peeking under the door, she saw nothing. Finally, the door unlocked. Teddy was drawing, eyes rolled back, hand moving seemingly on its own. When his eyes returned to normal, he denied drawing. He gave Mallory a drawing of the man burying Anya. That night, Mallory and Adrian reviewed the drawings. Adrian noted their disturbing smell. Mitzi's neighborly advice echoed in Mallory's mind. Adrian, concerned, offered Mallory refuge at his parents' house. She declined, committed to Teddy. Adrian offered to stay at her cottage for protection. He left to get supplies. Alone, Mallory felt increasingly uneasy. Adrian returned with groceries and news. His mother had found a book of Annie Barrett's paintings at the library. They examined the book, disappointed by the abstract art. However, Sophia, Adrian's mother, discovered Annie Barrett's will, mentioning a niece, Dolores Jean Campbell. They theorized Dolores might be Annie's daughter, given up for adoption. Sophia provided Dolores's contact information in Akron, Ohio. That night, at dinner with Russell, Caroline called, worried about Mallory. Russell, sensing Mallory's unease, offered support and a workout plan. After dinner, Russell drove Mallory home. At the cottage, Mallory found more drawings on her refrigerator. She called Russell, worried. He suggested a drug test, which Mallory readily took, proving her sobriety. But the mystery of the drawings deepened. The next night, Mallory went swimming again, this time with Ted. He offered swimming tips and made a pass at her, noticing her gritty tattoo. Another unsettling noise from the forest interrupted them. Caroline appeared still upset about the school call. Later, alone in the cottage, Mallory was terrified by noises beneath the floorboards. Investigating, she found the access panel and, opening it, screamed at the sight of something monstrous. Ted and Caroline again rushed to her aid, Ted blaming a possum. The story reached its climax with Mallory and Adrian piecing together the drawings, attempting to decipher Anya's message. They visited Mitzi again, but found her house empty and unlocked. Inside, they found drug paraphernalia and a Ouija board. Mitzi's notes from the seance were gibberish, or so it seemed. Suddenly, police arrived, revealing Mitzi had been found dead in the woods. Detective Briggs questioned Mallory and Adrian. Adrian's mother revealed Annie Barrett's book and the will, suggesting a hidden family secret. Sophia suggested Mallory call Dolores Campbell. Adrian, determined, decided to drive to Akron to meet Dolores. Mallory, packing to leave, felt a sense of finality. Caroline and Ted planned a farewell pool party, a strained, awkward affair. Caroline gifted Mallory a cookbook. Later, by the pool with Teddy, Mallory realized the extent of the Maxwells' deception. That night, Adrian returned with news. Dolores was Annie Barrett's daughter, and Annie Barrett was black, not Hungarian. The story of Annie's murder was a lie. Curtis Campbell, Dolores's son, revealed Annie had eloped with a black man, Willie, to escape her racist cousin George and Springbrook society. The drawings, Mallory realized, were Anya's attempts to tell her story, not a ghost story, but a tragic family history. As Adrian and Mallory tried to decipher Anya's message, Caroline and Ted confronted Mallory with a drug test, revealing their suspicion and fear. Caroline revealed Ted's discomfort and possessiveness towards Mallory. Heartbroken, Adrian left. Caroline, convinced Mallory was relapsing and delusional, prepared a syringe, claiming it was heroin laced with fentanyl, intending to stage Mallory's overdose. Caroline revealed her motive, protecting Teddy and silencing Mallory. However, Ted switched the heroin for baby powder. As Caroline prepared to inject Mallory, Ted intervened, getting shot by Caroline in the process. Mallory escaped with Teddy into the forest, pursued by Caroline. In a final confrontation by the Royal River, Teddy, possessed by Anya's spirit, stabbed Caroline with a broken arrow, killing her. Police arrived. In the epilogue, a year later, Mallory, in recovery and starting college, reflected on the events. Teddy, now Flora, was living with her father, seemingly happy. Mallory and Adrian remained friends. Mallory, writing her story, hoped to one day explain the truth to Flora. The final chapter ended with Mallory receiving a call from Rest Haven and a business card from Dr. Susan Lowenthal, the researcher from the gaze experiment, a loose end hinting at unresolved mysteries and connections, leaving the reader with a lingering sense of unease and the unanswered questions surrounding Mallory's near-perfect score in gaze detection. If you enjoyed this book breakdown, Please consider liking this video and subscribing to get notified when we post our next book.